Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. In this video, I will be performing a psychoanalysis on the death of familial values. Now, based on the psychotherapy some of you may have watched regarding the psychotherapy on relationships, if you have not watched the psychotherapy on relationships, I would invite you to do so before inquiring then into this particular video, which is where you enter into the death of the familial values. Imagine now, based on the previous analysis or psychotherapy of the relationship model, where we then understand each other as man and woman, and we may regain a sense of connection. In the analysis of the death of familial values, imagine now you create what is known as a divorce within the two parents of a relationship that has come together, that has withstood the test of time for a period of time. But now, in introducing the death of the familial values in a relationship that has tested a certain period of time, but then we see children arise out of that particular measure of time. But in the measure of time itself, we see that the children itself would essentially have to withstand the test of time, just as any child, but at a different potential rate. Upon introducing divorce into a relationship which was based on the initial binding of the masculine and female energy, resulting in a marriage, the idea behind creating a marriage initially is to create a lifelong commitment, so that you may commit not just to each other as partners, but to your children, which in the introduction of specifically creating what is known as a divorce, upon the introduction of divorce, well, we basically saw that the children of relationships of time, would they themselves not be worth that particular test of time known as the relationship, which in itself creates a relationship complex within the child, such as abandonment issues, on and on and on. But going forward into the actual stemmus, or where the trauma first initiates, is now in the single parenthood. Within the single parenthood, we could imagine now a son to a single mother would gain a more logical perspective on things in terms of an understanding as to the suffering of his mother. And based on this understanding, you would then see the more gentle development of the nature of this particular boy from an earlier point, because he has in sense become the substitute to the partner, that which the mother was seeking to have. She now sees her son as a partner figure, if you wish. And in developing the child or the son of a single mother, you then see a more gentle nature arise out of the particular son, which in itself results in frustrations, which, based on the psychotherapy of the two-part videos, you may understand now the frustrations behind what a gentle or essentially non-dominant man might feel. And because this non-dominant man is not given an example of a man, he now must generate that example based on other stimulus of what he might see either his mother induce with other men, or he generates it himself by understanding in relationships with other men. And now you see a split in polarities, which you create a sexual orientation from, which in the polar opposite, you have one option to be still within a straight orientation, or you create a split, or you actually now generate a breakage in the attraction to that particular sex based on how the experience of what you saw the particular mother might have behaved, and in the anger arise and all of other particular patterns, you might then see that homosexuality is in essence a stunting in the development of love towards a mother figure, and in seeking the single mother arises wanting a father. The same could be said for the opposite orientation known as lesbian. But going forward in the understanding of how sexual orientations, personalities, and all other creating factors that make you in yourself, your own experience, you could ultimately derive factors of these particular things back into the state at which you learned where you perceive love from. And going from the perception of love, we then generate our intelligent or logical or emotional response in order to adapt to said stimulus. And according to how we adapt, we then generate our own selves, which in the idea of understanding self, you must pursue your trial and tribulations, which means, in essence, you ultimately know yourself more than you know yourself the moment you know yourself. Which begs the question, what is the moment you know yourself? Well, it's an ongoing thing, you could say. And the more we discover that, the more you might see the changes in patterns of life. And ultimately, the patterns of these changes of life are known as a measure of life, which you would then arise from a measure of life, a relationship commitment that you would not just give to your partner, but to your children for life. Because in the death of the familial values, we see that this commitment cannot be made, and then we see the rise of all other potential effects of one particular cause, which is divorce. In the separating of the family, we separate people from people. And now we began seeing beyond the point of divorce that ultimately we are now in present day and age where men and women hate each other. And based on this assumption, there are still few that have goodness in them, and there's still some that have evil in them on both sides of each sex. And now on the opposite side of both sides of each sex in the goodness, you could actively now see the battle of moral compasses, such as political stances, on and on and on, based on the value model of the relationship structure between man and woman. We can then arise to see the battle ultimately known as the conscience battle between good and evil. Each side is pointing at the other saying, we are good and you are evil. And in this particular notion, driven back from political party and back down into a downward notion now, back to the individual, where you are now an individual personality. How did the death of the familial values affect your individual development? Because now when you, if I may, mix this particular question with the previous psychotherapy session based on understanding relationships, how did the death of familial values affect your ability to create relationships or understand your relationships or be in relationships? How did that affect you? And now we might see that that has affected a lot of people. And the more we push as a society for the idealization behind creating a death behind familial values, because in our understanding, apparently, it is a societal construct to see one another as a family. We are meant to see each other in a less humanizing way, which means the current state at which political movement is going, we are actively moving in a dehumanizing movement in the pursuit of liberalism, which in itself is a paradox. And so if we are not hoped up and doped up and buying all the lies of these politicians, how are we being fed a load of crap? Well, for one, you could say they've generated the whole system to benefit themselves, which is why we push the idea of liberalism, because in the idea of liberalism is the idea of creating a limited potential, which you can measure maximum minimums from. In the idea of creating liberalism or a more communist equity system, based on a Marxist model, you could then analyze that regarding the current state at which we then see unions specifically preaching, no matter how good or how bad you are, and how hard you work or how little you work, you will all make the same, no matter the potential at which you spend. However, the pressure we put on each individual does not change, simply the attitude does. And in the change of the attitude, we then see a dehumanizing state, because you are now actively seeing a person becomes more and more and more and more and more comfortable in a less potential greatness in their experience, which they dehumanize themselves and buy into the idea that in order to specifically create a savior perspective, we must now tax the rich, and we enter a huge rabbit hole because it is the rich that are creating the unions, and you are still voting for them. Politicians are descendants of rich people, hence why they are able to acquire the education in order to ascend to becoming a politician. And in that particular statement, not everybody gets to be a politician, which means if they want to control the world according to their liking, the current state of affairs of a country is as a result of yourself as a leader, and according to the relationship you have with the people of the country you're leading. If you have a negative score in your leadership, we should technically be able to give you the boot anytime, because we put you in power. And if we don't like you there, we get to say you are gone, because we put you in power there. And the moment you no longer reflect our stance of power, well, then I would argue we need to create a stance where we can create immediate elections within an immediate election. And in the current state of affairs regarding the dehumanizing that which the Liberal Party of Canada has been feeding a false hope to Canadians for almost 12 years now, under Liberal rule, where we are seeing the degeneration of not just man and woman, but a desexualizing of man and woman, where we are seeing not just the death of relationships between man and woman, but the death of familial values, and further and further and further dehumanizing natures, in the idea that we are becoming more free that way. And in the depth of this dehumanizing, behind the basis of Marxism, is where you find the core root of its fundamental religion, Scientology. And so, how deep is Scientology rooted within the leaderships of the celebrities, of the elites, that specifically tell you keep voting for the left so that we can keep you there? Welcome to the right. Thank you.